At a military base, a critical helicopter had remained grounded for days. No one could fix it. Every technician had given their best. Then, after watching quietly from a distance, an old man limped in with a rusted toolbox. A young officer laughed and called him grand. He told him to step back. But as the crew watched, something happened that no one expected, and by the end of it, the entire base stood frozen in silence. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? By the time the sun cut through the steel-gray clouds over Fort Rayburn Airfield, the grounded UH-1Y Venom had already been sitting cold for 72 hours, its diagnostics in a digital deadlock, mission-critical systems dark, flight crew tense, and the commanding brass growing more furious with each passing hour. Because this wasn't just any helicopter, it was the designated transport for the Vice Chief of Staff's surprise inspection, and the entire base was on edge, trying to avoid the kind of failure that could sink careers, cost funding, and get people reassigned to frozen outposts or forgotten departments. And Lieutenant Carson Wells, a 28-year-old officer with perfect posture and a face that still looked too fresh to carry 4 stars on his lapel, was sweating in his crisp uniform, not just from the heat, but from the pressure, because he was the one who had signed off on the readiness check just a week prior, and now 3 aerospace-certified technicians, 2 warrant officers, and the base's head mechanic had all thrown up their hands, baffled, defeated, unable to bring the bird back online. And that was when someone mentioned the old man who'd been hanging around the hangar again, the one with the limp and the toolbox that looked like it belonged in a museum, the one who didn't speak much but whose eyes always lingered too long on the machines, like he could hear them whisper, and Wells, already sick of bad suggestions, snapped. What the hell is a retired mechanic going to do that a team of MIT-trained engineers couldn't figure out? But the silence that followed was louder than the protest he expected, and it was Sergeant Delaney, 13 years on base, no nonsense, who finally said, "Because that old man's name is Walter Kinney, sir." And 40 years ago, he wrote the maintenance manual these birds were based on. But Wells waved him off like a fly, muttering, "Not another damn legend story." Yet still, Walter was already approaching, his limp slow but deliberate, his denim jacket soaked from the drizzle, his army-issued boots leaving damp footprints on the concrete as he carried a battered green toolbox that had seen more battles than most soldiers on the base. And without waiting for clearance, he walked straight up to the crew surrounding the Venom, eyes scanning every inch of the bird like a surgeon looking at an open chest, until Wells stepped forward, blocking his path, hand raised like a barrier, and said with clipped authority, "This is a secure repair zone. You need to stay out of this, Grandad." And though the words were meant to dismiss, to humiliate, to assert dominance in front of subordinates, Walter just stared at him, quiet, unreadable, eyes the color of storm clouds, and replied in a gravel voice soaked in decades of dust and rotor wash, "I was fixing these things before your father learned to shave," which drew a low ripple of tension from the watching crew. But Wells only scowled, saying, "You touch one bolt and you're off base in cuffs," to which Walter said nothing, just stepped back and sat on a crate, eyes locked on the Venom, while inside the hangar, the techs kept poking at the bird, running system resets, replacing data fuses, checking fuel lines and exhaust ports, but nothing worked. And as time bled away, the pressure became unbearable, especially after General Marcus Keating called down from the ops tower, with one sentence that sent shivers down Wells's spine. "If that bird isn't in the air by 1600 hours, I'll find someone who can fly without it," which was Keating's way of saying your career's already crashing, Lieutenant. And when another hour passed and the primary system refused to boot despite every software override, Wells finally cracked and snapped at the crew, "Fine, bring in the old man. But someone sign a waiver because I'm not explaining to the Pentagon how we let a fossil touch their tech." And Walter, without a word, stood, approached the Venom like it was an old friend who'd fallen ill, placed his palm gently on the nose, and closed his eyes for 2 seconds, listening, not with ears but with instinct. The kind you can't teach in flight school, The kind you earn through nights spent soaked in oil, hands blistered from heat, and memories of crash sites that still visit you in dreams. And then he opened his eyes, whispered, "She's choking on her own breath," climbed up to the intake without asking for a ladder, pulled a panel no one else had touched, and within 5 minutes had 2 wires spliced, 1 module removed, and 1 tiny cracked coupling replaced with a part so old it had a serial number etched by hand. And when someone asked what he'd just done, he replied, "There's a failsafe in this model that shuts the engine down when the sensor misreads thermal pressure." The boys tried to fix the engine, but the problem was the language it was hearing. And before Wells could interject, Walter climbed down, gave a single nod to the pilot, and said, "Try it now." And with a breathless tension hanging over the tarmac, the engine spun once, then twice, then roared to life like a sleeping beast awakened, its blades cutting through the air in a perfect sync that no software glitch could fake. And the Venom hovered a clean 2 feet before settling back down with elegance. And the silence that followed wasn't disbelief, it was reverence. The kind that only comes when something impossible just happened in front of your eyes. And Wells, red-faced and still trying to process what he'd witnessed, opened his mouth but found no words, because nothing he'd learned in officer school had prepared him for this moment. And then, from behind the crew, footsteps approached, measured, heavy, purposeful, and General Keating himself appeared, eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his face unreadable until he stopped directly in front of Walter, snapped to attention, and gave the kind of salute that men in the field reserve for warriors, not politicians, and said, "Chief Warrant Officer Walter Kinney, you still know how to make birds sing." And the whole crew straightened, realizing suddenly that the man they'd ignored, mocked or dismissed, was a living legend, a ghost from every training manual, a name whispered in hangars when someone fixed something no one else could. And as Walter returned the salute, Keating turned to Wells and said coldly, "Let this be your first real lesson in command. Some men don't need rank to earn respect." And then, turning back to Walter, he added, "We could use someone like you again." But Walter shook his head, eyes distant, replying, "I gave my bones to the service. What I got left belongs to my grandson and a broken-down tractor that still won't start," drawing a soft laugh from the crew. Though Wells didn't smile, he looked shattered, not from humiliation, but from the realization that his pride had nearly grounded something bigger than a helicopter. And later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the Venom took flight carrying its high-ranking passenger, Wells found Walter alone in the hangar, wiping grease from his hands, and said quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." But Walter didn't look up, just said, "Next time a machine won't talk to you, don't shout, just listen," and walked away into the fading light. Toolbox rattling, silhouette framed against the soft orange sky, while behind him a dozen crew members stood a little taller, a little quieter, each of them knowing they'd seen something they'd never forget, not just a repair, but a resurrection, not just a mechanic, but a man who carried 50 years of silence, loss, and duty in his shoulders, and still came back to save a bird, because when something breaks and no one else can fix it, sometimes it takes the hands that built it in the first place. And though Walter Kinney never asked for thanks, a plaque appeared a week later on the hangar wall, in honor of the quietest legend who ever spoke helicopter, and beneath it, his name, his rank, and a quote carved in steel. "Some men hear the machine, some become part of it." And every new recruit was told the story, not by order, not by curriculum, but by tradition, because every now and then, when a system failed and protocol choked, someone would look at a quiet man in the corner and ask, "Does anyone know where the old guy is?" and pray he was still listening.